June 29th, 2023. I'll go ahead and start recording and turn off the camera. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'll take the screen for now, just to make it easier to move things around and make it a little bigger.
Yep.
Can everyone see my screen now?
Yeah.
So this issue is pretty old, but still relevant, and it concerns underlay support in the Dash behavioral model. Routing, switching and routing, and Intel had contributed quite a number of test cases, PTF test cases that are skipped for the BMV2. They run on a real platform. My understanding is they run on Evans because they were, developed for that platform, and but they can't be really used by the community model because the model doesn't support those SCI APIs. And these are the APIs here that Anton identified. So we have someone working on this to see if we can implement it. And what it requires is a few things. One is to write P4 code that implements this. And the other is to tie it into the fixed SCI APIs. And it's a bit of a departure because currently anything that's in the P4 code generates SCI headers and code to connect it all to libsci and the libsci itself. And what we need is a way to use P4 tables to emulate these APIs, but not to generate any new SCI headers because the headers are already fixed in the SCI repo. These aren't generated from Dash code, they're fixed. So we're exploring this, and I wanted to mention that to the community, and we're working on this one first as a first POC, create route entry, where the route entry, the next hop ID for the purpose of this experiment is just a BMV2 port number, 0 or 1. And the point of this is to do a very primitive routing table and to prove out the way to get the libsci generated without messing with the SCI headers. That's basically the bottom line. What we're trying to do now is an experiment. And if that bears fruit, we would look into implementing all of these and try to actually pass some of these test cases. Also, in discussions, we've heard that for the Smart Switch project, I think the Sonic engineers have said we don't need routing in the Dash DPU because the switch is just going to work with the DPU in hairpin mode, meaning any packet that goes in a port will come out that same port, and we don't need to route it. So I wanted to. This is on the level of let's say word of mouth. I haven't seen an official proclamation, so I wanted to ask, what do people know about that? What's the interest in fleshing out these? Is that still important for the Dash project itself, or just important for a fully implemented Sonic switch on a DPU?
Well, I have a question, Chris. Yeah. How about in the appliance case, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So where we don't have a NPU or a switch ASIC.
I understand.
Then,
that's why I'm raising the question. This is like on the level of say informal conversations where we've been told, well, Microsoft said we don't need to, and I don't remember the details, and I don't want to get into the details, but we need to explore this because I know people have put work into implementing these underlay. Is that going to be in vain? Is there going to be an appliance use case that we're actually going to carry through, or is everything moved over to just Smart Switch where this becomes less important? So it's a rhetorical question, kind of aimed at Microsoft, but there might be other people.
I think one other thing I want to float here after discussing with some people lately is that what happens is that there is a explicit allocation of a DPU to a ENI, right? So what really happens is that when a packet arrives at the switch ASIC, the way smart switches are basically built is that in front of these DPUs, So there are a bunch of DPUs, right? So there's not going to be one DPU. So it's going to be like multiple DPUs. So like, let's say 6 or 8 DPUs are behind a switch ASIC. The packet arrives at the switch ASIC, and the switch ASIC has to basically make a decision that based on the ENI, I mean, of course, first you have to drive an ENI out of the contents of the packet, but then afterwards you have to say, oh, by the way, now I know the ENI, and now I have to basically decide to which DPU this ENI belongs to, because there is an explicit mapping, and I need to forward that one to the right DPU out of the 6 or 8 DPUs that are behind me. That, of course, also is a decision that before that, perhaps, in any of the underlay APIs, if you call it underlay API, so to speak, for the switch ASIC to say that where do I should forward it, right, for further processing. So again, this food for thought.
Yeah.
How would we do this thing, right?
Presumably in the appliance mode, that's already being done, right? And so would the software really have to change much?
Yeah, those decisions on how, there were some presentations in the SmartNIC Summit where um, how a DPU works and how it is controlled, whether it is inside the sheet metal or outside, on its own. They what we learned that the management of that remains the same. So yeah, regardless, if for this topic that you want to implement these um, API, you want to support this and add the code for it in BMV2, I think it will be very good as a, and then it can be utilized in any ways for sure.
Mhm.
I mean, if anything, there are a lot of test cases using routing. I mean, I guess Reshma, you and your team probably wrote those anyway, so that's more coverage for the BMV2 itself, for Dash itself, right?
Right.
With a fairly, like you say, it's Chris, it's the routing here is very basic. It's just it's mostly an RPM lookup to get the header and the Ethernet MAC, and that's about it. There's no ECMP, there's no load balancing, none of that. So,
Right.
And I think that, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, there's just one thing that you will run into is that your data plane has to be somehow aware whether or not you do, as a post-processing, you do routing or not, because the basic PTF test cases, they don't do routing at all. So maybe if you don't find a route, maybe you just say, well, I'm not doing anything, I suppose. But
in other words, the implicit thing is if there's no routing, then just hairpin it out the same port by default instead of dropping it, right?
It's more than a port, right? It's also your Ethernet header that's going to be modified.
Okay.
Like your next hop basically defines your destination MAC.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it's it's minor, I suppose.
Right. Basic routing is still needed in the even if it is without ECMP, and even if it is using ECMP, then it could be utilized in many different ways in different form factors other than the smart switch, appliance or otherwise, connected to multiple TORs and multiple other uplinks, switches, etc. But yeah, if you're planning to implement this and support that in BMV2, I think it's not a bad idea.
Okay, I don't think we're going to get into ECMP though, for sure. That would be beyond scope of anything we can do. But if we support the basic test cases, it sounds to me like people are still in favor of doing this if we can make progress.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that, Mukesh is on the call, and I don't have Prince or anyone on the call, but we do have an environment in Azure. I'm just saying for Azure, not for any other cloud, but we do have an environment called Canary where we could shift once this, things like this are done, we can shift over from, what we're doing today over into Dash pretty easily. We could convert and try it. So I think I have a vested interest in doing it.
Yeah, so I just want to go back to this question based on my comment. I think, so Chris, I think just to coming back to it while the discussion was happening in where I guess you mentioned that wouldn't that be the same if there was a appliance, right, versus the smart switch? So I would just say that in the appliance case, the DPU is accessible through the front panel port, and the packets are routed to the DPU based on the routing, right? Based on, I guess, the looking up the outside header and the outer header, and then just through the routing from the previous hop. That's how the packets are forwarded. But when it comes to smart switch, the packets are forwarded in a different way. So there is a difference in terms of how a decision is made in terms of selecting which DPU to send it out to. So there is a subtle difference there. I mean, or am I reading something totally different here?
Well, I'm not an expert. It doesn't, it sounds, oh, go ahead, Mukesh. We need an expert to answer that.
Yeah, so basically, I think these APIs refer to the packet that is going out of the DPU, not packets coming into the DPU, right? Because this determines the routing entries on the DPU that determines how the packet transmitted out of the DPU, which port does it go out on, stuff like that.
Yes.
So the packets coming into the DPU depends on the
Mukesh,
routing
I wasn't
entry
referring
on
to
the.
that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I
So
wasn't
one
referring to the
thing
one that's on the. Yeah. I was just
Right,
referring
so
to the fact that, okay, like if you have something that you need to really implement on the smart switch as underlay API. But yeah, you're right. Actually, the underlay APIs makes more sense when it's for the outgoing traffic on the DPU as opposed to the incoming part. But I was just
So
thinking in terms of, if you have to emulate something in a totality, how would you do that, right? So.
Right. So for the outgoing packet, actually, as far as I know, there's not much difference between smart switch versus the appliance. In either case, my understanding is that full-fledged routing is not required. But having said that, we would still need to support some of these APIs because we need to know which MAC address to send the packet to. I think earlier Vincent was mentioning that the next stop and the dest MAC that we need to send to is still important. So from that perspective, these APIs would still be required. Only thing probably is that there wouldn't be like a bunch of routes and then the forwarding happens based on one of those routes. None of those things might happen. There's probably going to be one single route. But it would still point to some next stop, and then next stop will say which MAC address and so on. So that path would still be valid.
Well, I mean, writing to know your header is not, it's optional for Dash because there is already an appliance configuration that actually gives you that header to start with.
So the appliance, I'm not sure if the appliance is actually part of the OCP side yet. I think that appliance table was just created for the temporarily for BMV2 is my understanding. I don't think it exists in the real OCP side.
I don't have the history on that. I don't know, Bud, if you have more details there, but maybe we need some clarification on what should be.
Yeah, my understanding is that the appliance was just created as a shortcut just to get things working here in the Dash repo. But in the actual SAI production environment, there's not going to be an appliance table.
But the fact is, if you have only one route, there's really no need to do a lookup per se, an RPM lookup on the outgoing side. So it's like those APIs are nice, but those API define a route lookup, right? Which is very heavy. Probably it's not something you want to do if it's only one route and pretty much your header is fixed, right?
Yeah. So, but you need some way to determine the MAC address. So you could have a fixed next stop or something in your forwarding path. You don't need an LPM lookup, but you still need some lookup to give you the MAC address.
Yeah, the table lookup, even if it is there, it can utilize fewer entries as needed. But that's a standard method of lookup and, implementing, updating next hop and all those things. So even in the future, if the appliance is one form factor, smart switch is one form factor, if the DPU is used by itself standalone. In any case, it would be useful in the cloud environment, outside different other use cases like enterprise or whatever it may be. And it's a standard way of implementing rather than hand modifying the destination MAC address. Yeah, it shouldn't consume too much of hardware resource because there'll be fewer entries, and that's fine, just that it's standard.
Yeah, but it's not really about hardware resource. It's about your data plane performance, right? It's yet another thing to do that you may, if you don't need to do, you don't need to do, right?
That's right.
I mean,
it's not
granted, if
needed,
it's only
not
one
needed.
route, you can optimize for that as opposed to doing generic lookup, sure. But if it's a step that is not needed, it's not needed.
Well, I think that was the context of this, I'll call it rumor. It's not really a rumor, but off the record discussion is that there's a performance penalty and a memory penalty for doing the general lookup. And if it's really not needed, why impose that on the data plane? So I guess to re-ask the question, if that's really the direction that things are headed and vendors don't need to implement the full sonic underlay like we had been laboring to believe, and everyone's going to get kind of a free pass on that because it's not needed and it will improve the memory and performance footprint, then how much should we spend on making these test cases if they're going to become not really crucial?
I guess the question is, we need a header. So do we reuse this with the assumption, do we reuse those known APIs, but we know there is only one, so it's a bunch of calls, but at the end of the day, you have one set of data, or do we make another one like the one we basically have temporary right now? I don't know.
Oh, so we'll this is a good discussion, just sort of as a reality check. We'll continue to proceed. It is an internship project, and it's a limited duration. So it's kind of an experimental project for us, but we'll try to make some progress on it and see how things go. If nothing else, we're going to we're going to come up with a few techniques for how to accommodate sci fixed headers into the dash libsci generator, that kind of thing. So it'll produce some useful outputs. It already has.
I think it will.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
nothing else. It's spawning some good conversations here where we're revisiting this, almost a year later almost.
Yeah. And I can think of 2 cases in Azure where I could use this, just if I have 2 different implementations inside Canary at least.
Well, now we're talking about BMV2. So when you're saying you could use it in Canary, do you mean on a real DPU?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so from that point of view, you would want production DPUs to implement the full underlay anyway?
Well, Canary's not exactly production. It's kind of in the middle.
Right, but it behaves as if it were a production device.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably something discussion needs to happen
Mm-hmm.
with vendors one-on-one, right? Expectation of software completeness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, this is useful.
It's really useful. Thank you. And
Appreciate
I
feedback from everyone.
Yeah, and I'll talk to Riff when I see him and talk to him about this.
Great.
So cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. So did the rest of you guys have anything else for today? So I know that I'm just pursuing my what's it called? My pursuit of P4 knowledge. So I'm just trying to find at least an hour a week to learn something and figure it out myself. So that's what I've been doing.
Krishna, I have a quick question before we probably wrap up. Just a quick question on a comment that was made at the SmartNIC Summit, I believe by Gerald. And there is, it was said that the Dash is going GA in Microsoft, in a month or so, right? I don't know whether
I don't think Dash was going GA. I think he said that the Sirius project was going GA, right? Am I splitting hairs here? So James's project with the Sirius appliance 48 or 42 RU rack with the two servers and the DPU slotted into it, that is supposed to go GA in July.
Okay.
Ish.
So Sirius has like
dates
Sirius
move,
has
and I'm not supposed to use that name externally. It's an internal project name, so don't get mad. But Mark Rasinovich used it in Ignite last September, and so what was your question? I'm sorry, I didn't want to talk over you.
Oh no, I said that. So this Sirius DPU, sorry, Sirius appliance has, I believe, 8 DPUs in it. Is it?
I think it's 6.
6. Okay, and the software that it is running is perhaps it's not Sonic
Pre-Dash.
Dash. Yeah,
Pre-Dash, yeah. But yeah, being ported over to Dash, but pre-Dash. There's a lot of balls in the air.
We could call it the project that was formerly known as Sirius, in the spirit of
Yeah, formerly known as Sirius. But yeah, keep going. What was the question? Is there more questions?
What does pre-dash mean?
So Christina, is
Custom.
it same as Rotterdam or is it like next generation?
No.
Okay.
I think what they did, this is before I joined the project, so I was brought in probably a year into what they were doing. So Gerald was working with James and a team before I joined, and they thought, well, to do pre and early development and make it go fast, they would go ahead and take something we had existing, which should be Rotterdam, modify it a bit, and move forward with development on that to move towards Sirius. So that's that idea. And then, so that's James. Do you know James Grantham? You guys, I think he's joined the call a couple of times. Okay, yeah. And then they brought me in. Sorry, I'm checking the chat here. So then they brought me in as well, and then I was to, once Sirius goes GA, then I move forward and do Dash Smart Switch. So, so it's not exactly Rotterdam, but it is. They used a baseline of Rotterdam to speed up development of Sirius and move toward the Smart Switch. If that makes sense.
Yep. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so James works with a lot of different internal teams to get the software to where he needs it to be so he can execute and go GA in July. So if that's helpful. And it looks like,
Thanks.
Yeah, it looks like Riff joined. Hi, Riff. We were just about wrapping up.
Hi, Christina.
Hi, hello.
Sorry for joining
morning.
late. Yep.
That's okay. That's okay. So everyone knows Riff is from the Sonic team, and Riff, everyone, this is everyone else. And in this meeting, we talk about the behavioral model and development of the behavioral model. And I can share my screen on this side just to show you, but we actually have a GitHub project here. GitHub allows you to make projects, Riff, and so you can, put action items and things you're working on in a behavioral model so that we can, run tests as if we had hardware, things like that. And we were talking about this one in particular, the underlay SCI API for BMV2. So that's what we were talking about today before you joined the call, and trying to decide if we still need, what was it, Chris, the outbound routing?
Yeah, we still need the full underlay outbound routing.
Yeah.
Next hop, routing interface.
Yeah, it's been a while since we had revisited this one, so we were trying to determine as we move from the appliance toward the smart switch, because when you have the smart switch, you don't hairpinning the traffic. We're trying to, and we came to a conclusion we think we need it. Chris, maybe you can.
Yeah, we still need to look up MAC address, etc. So there needs to be some. The lookups may be very small, may not be a giant LPM table like a generalized routing, but we still need some way to configure some minimum number of entries. So plan of record is just to use the existing SCI underlay APIs, even if they're, not fully exploited, unless some other proposal comes up for this.
I see.
Yeah.
Got it.
So we were just trying to think how, because the ports are different on the appliance versus the smart switch, how different would it be? And so if you have any context on that or can think about it for next time, that'd be awesome.
I thought P4 has some like you can specify the port, but maybe not. That's not the thing.
I'm not quite sure I heard you very well, Riff. Could you repeat that?
Oh, I thought P4 inside of P4 we can actually specify like which port it actually goes to. But yeah, it may be like different devices. So it turns out to be different. But
Well, the issue is not how it's implemented, other than for the behavioral model. Yes, we're using P4, but the question is, what are the SCI APIs support that we need to configure this even minimal routing? You know,
I
are we
see.
using the standard SCI APIs, and those are listed in PR 236. You might want to take a look at that.
I see.
You know,
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put the link here when I send out notes. But all right, guys. Did anyone have anything else, or should we adjourn for the day? Gonna do Andy's 7-second rule. Where did Andy go?
And speaking of Andy, if you're learning P4, Andy's
He's
P4
the
guide,
guy. Mhm.
he just has a P4 guide, Git repo. That's great.
Yeah, I've been looking through it. Okay. Well, you guys, I'm going to stop the recording.